The Park Cafe was a place for the rich, tucked between rows of neatly trimmed trees, with the soft hum of a fountain nearby. It was the kind of place where people in designer suits sipped expensive coffee, where laughter was light and problems seemed far away. But outside the black iron patio fence, a boy stood. He was small, too thin for his age, his hoodie hanging loosely from his bony frame. His name was Malik, though nobody in the cafe knew that. People passed him all the time on this street. He was just another face, another kid with nowhere to go. His stomach ached from hunger. The smell of warm bread and fresh coffee made it worse. He scanned the tables, his dark eyes darting between plates, pockets, and half-eaten meals left behind. But today, something else caught his attention. At the best table in the cafe, Bernard Green sat, a man who owned more buildings in this city than Malik could count. His face was one Malik had seen before, on magazine covers in shop windows. He was old, maybe 70, but still carried himself with the confidence of a king. Across from him sat his wife, Marissa, young, beautiful, and cold. Everything about her was perfect, from her flawless red lipstick to the diamonds on her wrist. But her eyes told a different story. They were distant, like she was somewhere else. Malik had seen rich people before. Malik had seen rich people before. He had learned to ignore them, but something was wrong. He saw it. A small, quick motion. Marissa's hand dipped into her designer handbag, fingers curling around something, a tiny bottle. She twisted the cap off, and with a flick of her wrist, she poured its contents into Bernard's steaming bowl of soup. Malik's breath caught in his throat. For a second, he froze, unsure if he had really seen what he thought he had. The clear liquid disappeared into the soup instantly, leaving no trace. Marissa leaned in closer to Bernard, her voice soft but sharp. "After all the trouble I've gone through, you won't ruin this now." Malik felt his chest tighten. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't his imagination. Something terrible was about to happen. Bernard picked up his spoon, his hand steady, completely unaware. Malik didn't think, he just moved. Pushing himself off the railing, he rushed forward, his voice cracking as he shouted, "Don't eat that." The cafe went silent. The sound of a fork dropping to the floor echoed through the air. All eyes turned to him. Bernard's spoon hovered inches from his lips. His sharp, commanding eyes locked onto the boy. Marissa's expression hardened, her jaw tightening as she turned toward Malik. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice cold as ice. But Malik didn't back down. His heart pounded, his hands shook, but he held his ground. "Hey! Saw you," he said, his voice unsteady, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You put something in his food." Gasps rippled through the cafe. For the first time, Bernard hesitated. His wife, however, didn't. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the stone floor. "You little liar," she hissed. "Who even let you in here? You just want money or food." But Malik wasn't lying, and Bernard knew it. He looked at the boy, then back at his wife, and slowly suspicion began to creep into his eyes. For a moment, nobody moved. The cafe was frozen in time, waiters clutching trays, customers staring, forks suspended in midair. Bernard Green, one of the most powerful men in the city, sat still. His spoonful of soup hovered just inches from his mouth. His sharp blue eyes flickered between his wife and the boy who had just screamed at him. Malik's breath was shaky, but his feet were planted firmly on the ground. He had been ignored before, shoved aside, treated like he was invisible. But this time, people were listening. This time, it mattered. Marissa's face twisted in anger, but it wasn't just anger, it was something else. Panic. Her hands clenched at the edges of the tablecloth, as if gripping for control. "Bernard," she said, her voice suddenly soft, almost pleading. "This boy is lying. Look at him. He's filthy. He's probably desperate for money. He just wants attention." Malik flinched at the words. He was filthy, he was desperate, but he wasn't lying. Bernard's eyes narrowed. Slowly he lowered his spoon back into the bowl. "What did you see, kid?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Malik swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressed down on him, but he forced himself to speak. "She put something in your soup." "A clear liquid, from a bottle in her bag," he said. Gasps. whispered through the cafe like a wave. Bernard's fingers curled around the spoon tighter. He turned his gaze to his wife. Marissa, his voice was colder now. What's in this? She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Oh, come on, Bernard, you're really going to listen to some street rat over me. But there was something in her eyes, something that made Bernard's stomach turn.
Doubt. Guilt.
Fear. Bernard slowly reached for the soup bowl and slid it away from himself. He turned toward the waiter, standing nearby.
Get security.
Marissa's eyes widened. You're not serious, I said. Get security. Bernard barked, his voice making the cafe tremble. The young waiter rushed away, nearly dropping his notepad in the process. Malik's heart pounded. He should have run, he should have left the second people started paying attention. But now there was nowhere to go. Marissa's face darkened, her perfect red lips pressed together, and for the first time, her mask slipped.
You've always been paranoid,
Bernard, she said quietly.
but you're not as smart as you think.
And before anyone could react, she grabbed her purse and bolted.
The cafe erupted into chaos.
A chair tipped over, plates shattered as people gasped and scrambled out of the way. Malik flinched, nearly knocked over by a rushing waiter. Bernard shot to his feet, his cane nearly toppled as he reached for Marissa, but she was already pushing past the tables, weaving through the shocked customers.
She was running.
And that meant one thing, she was guilty. Bernard turned back to Malik, his face unreadable.
Come with me,
he said. Malik hesitated, his legs wanted to run, but something in Bernard's voice stopped him. For the first time in a long time, someone was looking at him like he mattered. Security was on their way, Marissa was getting away, and Malik had just turned a billionaire's world upside down.
Malik hesitated.
His bare feet, aching against the cold tile floor. He had never been asked to come with anyone. Usually, people wanted him to leave. But something in Bernard's voice made him stay.
The billionaire's hands trembled slightly.
As he pulled out his phone, "Find her," he barked into the receiver. Now, the security team was already moving, pushing past stunned guests. But Marissa was quick. The cafe doors swung shut behind her, and for a moment, it seemed like she had vanished into the busy streets. Bernard exhaled sharply, his expression a mixture of anger and something else, something closer to heartbreak. His gaze turned back to Malik. "You saw it with your own eyes?" he asked. Malik nodded, his throat was dry, but he forced himself to speak.
Yes.
"A small bottle. She poured something in when you were distracted." Bernard's jaw tightened. He slowly turned back to his untouched soup, staring at it like it was something foreign, something dangerous. Then without a word, he picked up a spoonful and sniffed it. The smell was off, bitter, metallic. A shiver ran down his spine. "You just saved my life, kid." Malik swallowed hard. The weight of those words made his knees weak. He wasn't used to being important enough to make a difference. The cafe manager rushed over. "Sir, do you want us to call the police?" Bernard didn't answer right away. He was still staring at Malik, studying him, trying to make sense of everything.
Yes.
He finally said, "Call them, and have this soup tested." The manager nodded, and hurried away. The room felt heavier now. The guests murmured in hushed voices. Some stared at Malik, but not in the usual way, not with disgust or pity. This time, there was something else in their eyes, respect. Bernard took a deep breath, and looked back at Malik. "What's your name, Malik? Do you have anywhere to go, Malik?" Malik dropped his gaze, his hands curled into the ragged fabric of his hoodie. He knew what people expected him to say, maybe a shelter, maybe a distant relative, but he had nothing. No. Bernard was silent for a long time. Then he did something that Malik never expected. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. He placed it on the table between them. "That changes today." Malik stared at the card, his pulse quickening. The name Bernard Green was printed in bold letters. Underneath, a phone number, an address. "You saved my life, and I don't forget things like that." Bernard said, "Come with me, let's get you a warm meal, a real one." Malik's heart pounded. This didn't feel real. People like Bernard Green didn't talk to kids like him, they didn't care. And yet, for the first time in a long time, someone was reaching out. The police sirens echoed in the distance. Marissa might have been running, but she wouldn't get far. Malik had changed everything. And maybe, just maybe, his own life was about to change too. Malik hesitated. His fingers hovered over the business card, afraid to touch it, afraid this moment wasn't real. Bernard's voice was softer now. I know it's a lot, kid, but you don't have to do this alone. The sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue outside the cafe windows. A group of uniformed officers stormed in, their radios crackling. The manager pointed toward Bernard. One of the officers stepped forward. Mr. Green, we received a report about. She tried to poison me. Bernard interrupted, his voice sharp again. He motioned toward the untouched soup. I want it tested, and I want Marissa found. The officer nodded. Another cop was already speaking to witnesses, writing down statements. Meanwhile, Malik sat frozen in his seat. He had spent years running from police officers, avoiding their questions, their judgmental stares. But today was different. This kid saved my life, Bernard added, turning toward Malik. Make sure that's in your report. The officer gave Malik a long look before nodding. Malik swallowed hard. No one had ever defended him before. A few hours later, Bernard led Malik into his sleek black car. The seats were warm, the air smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Malik felt out of place, his dirty hoodie and torn shoes stark against the luxury. Hungry? Bernard asked as they pulled away from the cafe. Malik nodded hesitantly. His stomach had been empty for too long. Minutes later, they stopped at an upscale restaurant. Bernard waved away the hostess and led Malik to a private booth. Order whatever you want. Malik stared at the menu, overwhelmed. The dishes had fancy names he didn't understand, but his eyes landed on something familiar. Spaghetti. That, he said quietly, pointing. Bernard smiled. Good choice. As they waited for the food, Bernard leaned forward. So Malik, tell me, how did you end up on the streets? Malik hesitated. This was the part where people usually lost interest, where their pity turned into discomfort. But Bernard's gaze remained steady, patient. My mom died when I was 10. Foster care wasn't great. I ran away. Bernard sighed. No family. Malik shook his head. A heavy silence settled between them. Then Bernard said something that made Malik's breath hitch. You remind me of someone. Malik blinked. Who? Me? Bernard exhaled, his expression unreadable. I wasn't always a billionaire kid. I grew up in a broken home. No money, no safety, just me and the streets. Malik stared. He had never imagined someone like Bernard Green could have once been like him. Someone helped me once, Bernard continued, gave me a chance. That's why I'm here now. And that's why I want to help you. Malik's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say. The food arrived, and for the first time in years, Malik ate until he was full. He wasn't just surviving, he was being cared for. As they left the restaurant, Bernard placed a firm hand on Malik's shoulder. This isn't just a meal, kid. If you're willing, I want to change your life. Malik met his gaze, hope flickering in his tired eyes. For the first time in a long time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Malik sat in Bernard's car, staring out the window as the city lights flickered past. His stomach was full for the first time in days, but his mind was racing. This isn't just a meal, kid. If you're willing, I want to change your life. Bernard's words echoed in his head. What do you mean? Malik finally asked. Bernard exhaled, adjusting his cufflinks. I mean a fresh start, a home, education, a real chance to build something for yourself. Malik's fingers tightened around the edge of his hoodie. It sounded too good to be true. People didn't just help for no reason. Why? He asked, quietly. Bernard glanced at him. Because someone once did the same for me. The car slowed as they pulled into a gated driveway. Malik's breath hitched. The house, no mansion, before him looked like something from a movie. Huge glass windows, perfectly trimmed hedges, and a fountain in the front. Come inside, Bernard said, stepping out. Malik hesitated before following. His shoes squeaked against the polished floors as they entered. A woman in a professional suit greeted them. Mr. Green, welcome back. She smiled at Malik. And you must be Malik. He shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, this is Angela, Bernard explained. She handles a lot of my personal affairs. She's going to help get you settled. Malik swallowed. Settled. I meant what I said, kid. You can stay here. We'll get you new clothes, set you up with school, and school. Malik cut in. His chest tightened. I don't know, man. This is a lot. Bernard knelt slightly to meet his eyes. His voice was steady but gentle. I know it's scary, but you don't have to survive alone anymore. You deserve a chance, Malik. Malik wanted to believe that, but he had spent so long fighting for scraps, trusting no one. How could he just accept this? You don't have to decide now, Bernard added, but stay the night. Think about it. Malik exhaled, shakily. Okay, just one night. That night, Malik lay in the softest bed he had ever touched, staring at the ceiling. His mind wouldn't stop spinning. Could he really leave the streets behind? Did he deserve this? For the first time in years, Malik didn't fall asleep, afraid. For the first time in years, he had hope. Malik woke up disoriented, his body sinking into the soft mattress. For a moment he thought he was still dreaming. The scent of fresh laundry clung to the blankets. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows. No cold pavement beneath him. No honking cars. No gnawing hunger in his stomach. Then the memories rushed in. Bernard, the dinner, the offer. He sat up quickly, heart pounding. His first instinct was to run. He'd spent years depending only on himself, and now, suddenly he was supposed to trust a billionaire who barely knew him. A soft knock at the door made him flinch. Malik, it's Angela, came a gentle voice. He hesitated, then muttered. Yeah, she peeked in with a warm smile. Mr. Green asked me to check on you. Breakfast is ready whenever you're up. Food. His stomach rumbled. Okay, he said, pushing off the bed. The dining room was bigger than any place Malik had ever lived in. A massive chandelier hung above, and the table looked like it could seat 20 people. Bernard sat at one end, sipping coffee. Morning, kid, he greeted. Sleep well. Malik just nodded, eyeing the feast before him. Pancakes, eggs, fruit, even a smoothie. He hesitated before sitting. You don't have to be nervous, Bernard said, reading his hesitation. Malik shrugged, picking up a fork. I ain't used to this. Bernard smiled. I get it. There was something in his tone, something real. Malik looked at him. You said someone helped you once. Bernard set his coffee down. Yeah, when I was a teenager, I was lost, angry at the world. A mentor took me in, gave me guidance, and helped me believe in myself. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here today. Malik poked at his pancakes. And now you're doing that for me. Bernard nodded. Only if you want it. Malik thought about the streets, the hunger, the cold. Then he thought about this: warmth, safety, a future. Could he really let himself have this? What if I mess up? He asked quietly. Bernard leaned forward. Then you learn, and you try again. A lump formed in Malik's throat. No one had ever said that to him before. For the first time, he considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to struggle forever. Malik spent the first few days in Bernard's house, feeling like an outsider in someone else's dream. Everything was too clean, too quiet, too safe. He wasn't used to it. The bed was too soft, the food too rich, the kindness too real. Angela, the housekeeper, always checked on him. She never asked too many questions, never pushed, just made sure he had what he needed. Bernard was around too, but he didn't smother him. He treated Malik like he had a choice in everything. That was new. One evening, Bernard walked into the lounge, where Malik was watching TV, arms crossed. I know this is a big change, Bernard said, sitting down across from him. But I don't want you to feel like a guest forever. This is your home too, if you want it to be. Malik scoffed. Home. The word felt foreign on his tongue. Yeah, Bernard said, smiling. But home isn't just about where you sleep. It's about having purpose. So tell me, what do you want to do with your life? The question hit Malik like a brick. No one had ever asked him that before. I dunno, he mumbled, looking down. That's okay, Bernard said. You've survived on your own for years. That takes strength. But survival isn't the same as living. Malik swallowed. He wanted to believe him. I don't know how to do anything else. Bernard leaned back. Then let's figure it out together. The next morning, Malik found himself standing outside a community center. Bernard had taken him to. "What is this?" he asked. "A place where people get second chances," Bernard said. "They offer classes, job training, even counseling. You don't have to decide anything today, but I want you to see what's possible." Malik hesitated. Part of him wanted to turn around and run, but another part, the part that was tired of running, stepped inside. For the first time in years, hope didn't seem like a lie. Malik hesitated at the entrance of the community center. The place was buzzing with life, people talking, laughing, moving from room to room with purpose. He felt out of place, like he didn't belong. Bernard placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just take a look around, no pressure." Malik nodded, but his stomach twisted. He had spent so long just trying to survive, stealing, hiding, keeping his head down. Could he really change? Inside, a woman, with curly gray hair and warm eyes, greeted them. "Welcome, you must be Malik. I'm Linda, the coordinator here." Malik nodded, unsure what to say. Bernard did most of the talking, explaining how Malik was looking for a fresh start. Linda smiled. "You're in the right place. Let me show you around." They walked past classrooms, where people were learning computer skills, others working with their hands, carpentry, mechanics, even cooking. There were job boards, flyers for GED classes, and support groups. "What interests you?" Linda asked. Malik shrugged. "I dunno." She didn't push. "That's okay. No rush. Just know that you have options." Later, Bernard and Malik sat on a bench outside. "So?" Bernard asked. Malik exhaled. "It's a lot." "I know," Bernard said, "but you don't have to figure everything out today. Just take one step at a time." Malik was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe I could try one of those classes, just to see." Bernard grinned. "That's all I wanted to hear." For the first time in a long while, Malik felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him. Hope. The next day, Malik found himself back at the community center, standing in front of a door labeled Basic Cooking and Culinary Skills. He had never really thought about cooking before. Food for him had always been whatever he could find: dumpster scraps, stolen sandwiches, or whatever kind strangers handed him. But the smell coming from inside the room, warm, rich, inviting, made his stomach rumble. He hesitated. Maybe this was a mistake. "You coming in, kid?" Malik turned to see a stocky man in a white apron and a friendly smile. He had dark skin, salt and pepper hair, and a voice that carried warmth. "I'm Chef Raymond. You must be Malik." Malik nodded slowly. "Well, standing out here won't teach you how to make anything. Come on in." Inside, the class was buzzing with energy. People young and old were chopping, stirring and tasting. Malik stood awkwardly near the door, unsure of what to do. Chef Raymond handed him an apron. "We're making chicken soup today. Ever made it before?" Malik shook his head. "No problem. Stick with me." As the lesson began, Malik watched how Chef Raymond explained things patiently. How to cut vegetables properly, how to season broth, how to taste and adjust flavors. Malik mimicked his movements, slicing carrots and onions. His hands weren't steady, but he kept going. "Good," Raymond said, nodding approvingly. "Cooking isn't just about food, kid. It's about care. A good meal can change someone's day, sometimes even their life." Malik listened, absorbing every word. When the soup was done, he took a cautious sip from his bowl. It was warm, comforting, good. For the first time in years, he had made something with his own hands. He looked up at Chef Raymond. "Can I come back tomorrow?" The chef grinned. "You better." For the first time in a long time, Malik didn't just feel like a survivor. He felt like he had a future. Malik didn't miss a single day at the community center after that. Each morning, he woke up early, still feeling a mix of nerves and excitement in his stomach, as he prepared for his cooking class. The routine was new to him, but it was a good kind of new. Chef Raymond noticed the change. Malik was no longer the quiet, unsure kid who barely knew how to hold a knife. He was starting to gain confidence, not just in his cooking but in himself. One afternoon, Chef Raymond stopped him as he was cleaning up. "You're a natural, Malik." Malik looked up, a little surprised. "Me? Yeah, you've got a real instinct for flavor. You're always the first to taste and adjust when something's off. That's the mark of a great cook." Malik felt a warmth spread through him. A real compliment. From someone who wasn't just being polite. Thanks, chef, Malik mumbled, feeling shy but proud. Over the next few weeks, Malik's skills grew. He was learning more than just recipes. He was learning about discipline, about focusing on one thing and doing it well. When he wasn't cooking, he was helping Chef Raymond prep for the next class, organizing ingredients, and even cleaning the kitchen. He didn't mind the hard work. It felt purposeful. One day, as the class wrapped up, Chef Raymond pulled Malik aside again. How'd you like to help me out with something? Malik tilted his head. Like what? There's a new project coming up, a catering event for a local charity. I need someone to assist me, and I think you've got the skills to do it. Malik's heart raced. Catering? You want me to help with that? I wouldn't offer if I didn't think you were ready, Chef Raymond said with a grin. You've come a long way. Malik's mind raced. A real job. It seemed like a dream. But could he really do it? I'll do it, Malik said, the words coming out before he even had time to second-guess himself. The event came fast. Chef Raymond picked Malik up early, and together they spent the day cooking for the guests, preparing dozens of dishes, making sure everything was just right. Malik helped plate the food, arranging each dish like he'd seen Chef Raymond do. His hands moved with purpose, and for the first time, he felt like he was truly a part of something. The event was a success. Guests praised the food, and Chef Raymond smiled at Malik, clearly impressed with how he'd handled everything. You did great, Raymond said, as they packed up the last of the supplies. This could be the start of something big. Malik's heart swelled. He hadn't realized how much he had missed feeling valued, not for what he could steal, or how he could survive, but for what he could give. Later that week, Bernard called Malik to check in. How's everything going? Malik smiled, his voice full of new energy. I'm good, really good. I'm working with Chef Raymond now, helping with catering. There was a pause, and Malik could almost hear the smile in Bernard's voice. That's great to hear, Malik. I knew you had it in you. For the first time, Malik felt like he was becoming someone who mattered. Malik's life started to feel different. For the first time in a long while, he was waking up with purpose. Every day he worked with Chef Raymond. His skills improved, and with each successful dish, his confidence grew. The fear and uncertainty that used to shadow his every step started to fade, replaced by a quiet pride. One afternoon, as they were finishing up preparations for another catering event, Chef Raymond surprised him again. Malik, I've got something for you, Chef Raymond said, his voice unusually serious. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small stack of papers. I've been talking to a friend of mine who owns a local restaurant. They're looking for someone to join their team, and I think you'd be a perfect fit. Malik's heart skipped a beat. A real restaurant job? He hadn't even dreamed of something like that. Are you serious? Chef Raymond nodded. I wouldn't offer it if I didn't think you were ready. You've got the skills, and more importantly, you've got the drive. I think this could be the next step for you. Malik felt overwhelmed. He'd never imagined a life where he had a steady job, let alone working in a restaurant. But he knew this was the opportunity of a lifetime. I'll take it. I want to try. That night, as he lay in bed, Malik thought about all that had changed. The cold nights spent on the streets, the hopelessness that used to weigh him down, felt like a distant memory. He wasn't that boy anymore. He was someone with potential, someone who mattered. The next day, Chef Raymond drove him to the restaurant to meet the owner. The restaurant was a small but busy place, with an open kitchen that gave it a welcoming, lively atmosphere. The owner, a friendly woman named Carla, greeted them warmly. So Malik, she said, shaking his hand firmly, I've heard great things about you. Chef Raymond speaks highly of your work. Malik's nerves started to kick in, but he swallowed them down. I'm ready to learn. I want to do this. Carla smiled. I like your attitude. We'll start you off as a prep cook, and see how you do. If you're as good as Chef Raymond says, we'll make sure you have room to grow. Malik couldn't believe it. Thank you. I won't let you down. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. Malik was up early every day, working long hours, chopping vegetables, prepping sauces, learning how to balance the pace of the kitchen. It was hard work, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like the beginning of something big. Carla was patient with him, always giving him constructive feedback, but never criticizing him harshly. She saw his potential, just like Chef Raymond had, and that made Malik want to work even harder. One night, After a particularly busy dinner rush, Carla approached him. "You're doing great, Malik. The team's impressed with how quickly you've picked everything up. I think we're ready to give you a shot at running your own station." Malik's breath caught in his throat. "Are you serious?" Carla smiled. "Yes, I am. I wouldn't offer it if I didn't think you were ready." Malik could hardly believe it. Just months ago, he had been on the streets, struggling to survive. Now he was about to run a station in a restaurant. It felt like a dream. The first time he ran his own station, Malik was nervous, but everything went smoothly. He found his rhythm, his hands working quickly and confidently. The tickets came in fast, but he stayed focused, delivering each plate with care. When the dinner rush was over, Carla pulled him aside again. "That was impressive, Malik. You handled the pressure like a pro. I'm proud of how far you've come." Malik felt a rush of warmth. He had never imagined he would get to feel this appreciation, respect, and pride in his work. A few weeks later, Bernard called him again. "How's everything going?" he asked, his voice as calm and kind as ever. Malik smiled as he answered, "It's going great, Bernard. I'm working in a real restaurant now. I'm running a station." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then Bernard spoke, his voice warm with pride. "I knew you had it in you, Malik. You've turned your life around, and I'm proud of you." Malik felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear those words, how much they meant. "Thank you, Bernard. I wouldn't be here without you." That night, after work, Malik sat alone in his small apartment. The place wasn't much, just a simple room, with a bed and a small kitchen, but it was his. It was the first place he could truly call his own. He thought about everything that had happened in the past year, the chaos, the pain, the fear, but he also thought about the people who had helped him along the way. Chef Raymond, Bernard, even Carla. They had seen something in him when he couldn't see it in himself. Malik wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. And for the first time in a long time, he believed he could make something good out of his life. The months that followed felt like a blur of hard work and small victories. Malik's life had shifted so much in such a short amount of time. Each day brought new challenges, but it also brought new reasons to be proud. Running his own station at the restaurant was still a little surreal. There were times when he'd catch himself in the kitchen, surrounded by the clatter of pans and the hum of the busy restaurant, and for a moment it felt like he was dreaming. One of the most significant moments came one afternoon, when Chef Raymond called him into the office. Malik had just finished prepping for the evening shift, and the last thing he expected was to be called into the back room. "Everything all right, Chef?" Malik asked, nervous, but trying to keep his voice steady. Chef Raymond looked at him with a grin that stretched across his face. "I've got an offer for you, Malik. The head chef position at this restaurant." Malik's heart raced, his mind struggling to keep up with what he was hearing. "What? Are you sure?" Raymond nodded. "I've been watching you, and I've seen how you handle yourself in the kitchen. You've earned this." Carla agrees too. "We both think you're ready." Malik's mind went blank. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. He had never expected this, never imagined that one day he'd have the opportunity to lead a kitchen. "Take your time to think about it," Chef Raymond added. "But I believe you've got everything it takes to make this work." That night, Malik couldn't sleep. The weight of Chef Raymond's words lingered in his mind. A head chef? It was everything he had ever wanted, but at the same time, it felt so overwhelming. He thought back to the days when he had no roof over his head, no job to speak of, and no hope for the future. Could he really step into such a big role? The next morning, Malik arrived at the restaurant early, as he always did. He paced the small apartment he now called home, trying to weigh the decision. He thought of Bernard, who had helped him see his potential when he couldn't see it for himself. And then he thought of Chef Raymond, who had believed in him when he was just another homeless kid in the streets. Malik knew what he had to do. He had worked too hard and come too far to back down now. That afternoon, when Chef Raymond asked again, Malik didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." Taking on the role of head chef wasn't easy. There were days when Malik felt like he was drowning in responsibilities, from overseeing the kitchen staff to managing the flow of orders. There were moments of doubt, when he wondered if he was really ready, if he could keep up with the demands of running a kitchen. But then he would remember how far he had come, Each time he faced a challenge, Malik remembered what it was like to have nothing, no family, no place to call his own. And each time he overcame an obstacle, it felt like a victory not just for him, but for all the people who had ever doubted him. One evening, as he prepared the final orders for the dinner service, Carla came into the kitchen. She didn't say anything at first, just watched, as Malik worked with a steady, confident hand. Finally she spoke. "You've done an incredible job, Malik. The kitchen is running like a well-oiled machine, and the team respects you. You've earned this position, more than anyone I know." Malik felt his throat tighten. The words meant more than he could express. "Thank you, Carla. I never thought I'd be here, but I'm grateful." Carla smiled. "You deserve it, never forget that." The real test came a few months later, when the restaurant was invited to participate in a prestigious culinary competition. It was a big deal, and the pressure was intense. The team worked tirelessly, testing new dishes, perfecting old ones, and making sure everything was flawless. The night of the competition, Malik felt a wave of anxiety. He was still the new head chef, still trying to prove himself. But as he looked around at his team, something shifted. He wasn't alone, they were all in this together. The competition was fierce, but when the results were announced, Malik's restaurant had won second place. It wasn't first, but it was a huge achievement. The team celebrated late into the night, and Malik felt an overwhelming sense of pride. He had led them here, and they had all made it happen. That night, when Malik got home, he sat on the edge of his bed, reflecting on everything. There was a time when he didn't know if he would survive, let alone thrive. But here he was, head chef, respected by his team, and building a future he never thought possible. He picked up his phone and called Bernard. "Hey Bernard, I've got something to share." There was a pause before Bernard's voice came through the line. "What's going on, Malik?" Malik smiled. "I did it. I'm the head chef now. We just got second place in the competition." For a long moment, there was silence. Then Bernard spoke, his voice full of emotion. "I knew you had it in you, Malik. You've come so far, and I couldn't be prouder of you." Malik's eyes burned with tears. "Thank you for never giving up on me." The following weeks brought new opportunities. The restaurant's success in the competition led to more recognition, and soon Malik was invited to give talks at local events, sharing his story. He spoke about his journey, from the streets to the kitchen, the hard work and the people who helped him along the way. But through it all, Malik stayed grounded. He knew the person he had become was the result of everyone who had ever believed in him. Chef Raymond, Bernard, Carla. He owed so much to them, and to himself. The success of the competition had opened new doors for Malik. With each day, his confidence grew, and he began to believe more and more that the life he had now was the life he was meant to live. But as much as he had achieved, there were still challenges that lay ahead, things he had yet to face. The pressure of being a head chef was immense. Every day, he had to ensure the kitchen ran smoothly, manage his staff, and keep up with the ever-changing demands of the restaurant world. But there was one thing that was constantly on his mind: how to stay true to himself, to the person he had become, and not get lost in the whirlwind of success. One evening, after a particularly long day, Malik sat down at a small cafe, the hum of the city buzzing around him. He felt the weight of everything on his shoulders, but there was also a sense of peace in knowing he had come so far. As he sipped his coffee, he reflected on how much had changed in his life. From the streets to the kitchen, from a homeless boy with no hope to a man with a future he could build. And yet, he knew there was still more to be done. One day, Chef Raymond pulled Malik aside again, this time for a more serious conversation. "Malik, I've been thinking," Raymond began, his tone serious but kind. "You've been doing a fantastic job, and I think it's time to take things a step further." Malik raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Raymond hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "I've been offered an opportunity to open a new restaurant. It's a big deal, but I won't be able to do it alone. I need someone I can trust to take the reins here, and I think you're that person." Malik's heart skipped a beat. The thought of being fully responsible for the restaurant was terrifying, but it also thrilled him. It was a chance to prove to himself, and to everyone who had ever doubted him, that he was capable of leading something this big. Malik stopped himself, unsure of what to say. The responsibility was heavy, but the opportunity was too great to pass up. "Take some time to think about it," Raymond said. "This is a big decision, and I want you to be sure." For the next few days, Malik couldn't shake the thought of taking over the restaurant. The pressure was immense, but he had come so far. Could he really take on such a huge responsibility? Could he lead this restaurant into the future, just as Raymond had? He thought about all the people who had supported him along the way. Bernard, Chef Raymond, Carla, and everyone who had believed in him when he had nothing. They had helped him become the man he was today, and they had shown him that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. Finally, Malik made up his mind. The next morning, he walked into the restaurant and found Raymond. "I'm ready," Malik said, his voice steady. "I'll do it." Raymond smiled, a proud look in his eyes. "I knew you would be. You've earned it, Malik. You've always had it in you." The transition wasn't easy. Malik had to learn how to manage not just the kitchen, but the business side of things too. There were meetings with investors, decisions about the future of the restaurant, and the constant pressure to maintain the quality that had brought them success in the first place. But with each passing day, Malik grew more confident in his ability to handle it all. The staff respected him, and the customers continued to come back. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but Malik was learning to navigate the storm, and through it all, he never forgot where he came from. Every time he faced a tough decision, he would remember the nights spent hungry on the streets, the kindness of strangers, and the people who had lifted him up when he couldn't lift himself. A year later, Malik found himself standing at the front of the restaurant, watching as the dinner service unfolded. The restaurant was packed with customers, the kitchen running like a well-oiled machine. He had done it. He had taken the restaurant to new heights, and he had built a team that respected and trusted him. But what amazed him most was how much he had grown as a person. The boy who had once been lost, with no direction or purpose, was now a man with a clear vision of what he wanted and where he was going. As he walked through the kitchen, he found Carla, who had stayed by his side throughout his journey. "Carla," Malik started, but his voice caught in his throat. He had no words to describe the gratitude he felt. Carla smiled, sensing his emotions. "I know, Malik. I'm proud of you. You've come so far." Malik nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without all of you." Malik's story was far from over. He had made it through the toughest of times, and he had achieved more than he had ever dreamed possible. But in his heart, he knew there was still so much to do. He still had a passion for helping others who were struggling, like he once had. He wanted to open his own foundation to support homeless youth, to give them the opportunities they deserved, and the hope that had once been so hard to find. But for now, Malik stood tall, proud of the man he had become, knowing that every step he had taken, every challenge he had faced, had led him to this moment. He had built a future for himself, a future that was his to shape, one meal, one step at a time, and he wasn't done yet.